Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Appalachian Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We are interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The rain fell steadily across the Cumberland Gap that autumn evening in 1865, washing away the last physical traces of what would become one of the most disturbing industrial tragedies in Appalachian history. In the small coal mining settlement of Hollow Creek, nestled deep within the valleys of eastern Kentucky, 13 miners had vanished without explanation. Their disappearance might have been forgotten entirely, like so many tragedies that befell these mountains after the Civil War, if not for a peculiar document discovered nearly a century later. According to county records, the Hollow Creek mine had never existed. The town itself appeared on maps only briefly before being absorbed into neighboring communities as the coal industry expanded northward. But in 1963, a history professor from Eastern Kentucky University named Dr. Thomas Whitaker stumbled upon a series of anomalies while researching post-war industrial development. What he found would consume the remaining years of his academic career, though his findings were never formally published. It began innocuously enough, with a footnote in a county land survey from 1872 referencing the abandoned settlement at Hollow Creek, deemed uninhabitable following industrial cessation. This single reference, contradicting official records stating the area had never been developed, sparked Whitaker's curiosity. Further investigation revealed property tax records from 1863-1865 for a Blackwood Coal Company operation, followed by a complete absence of documentation after September 1865. Most curious was a line item in county expenditures from October of that year: emergency services rendered to Hollow Creek vicinity as authorized by state authorities. No details of these services were provided, and subsequent budget records contained no follow-up entries. The official account was simple. A mining accident had claimed several lives. The operation was deemed unsafe, and the company relocated. Nothing unusual for the dangerous profession of coal extraction in the 19th century. Yet Whitaker noted curious inconsistencies. No death certificates were ever filed, no graves marked in local cemeteries, no newspaper accounts beyond a 2-sentence notice that operations at Hollow Creek have ceased due to unforeseen difficulties. The silence surrounding the incident was deafening. Even more telling was what Whitaker discovered in church records from nearby Pine Ridge. The parish registry showed 13 families suddenly departing the region in October 1865. Families whose male members had worked at Hollow Creek Mine. The pastor's private journal, preserved in church archives, contained a cryptic entry. The widows refused to speak of what happened to their husbands. They claim no knowledge, yet their eyes betray a terror beyond normal grief. They will not allow memorial services, saying only that there is nothing to bury and nowhere to bury it. Through meticulous cross-referencing of land deeds, parish records, and fragmented company documents preserved in state archives, Whitaker gradually assembled a clearer picture of Hollow Creek before its sudden abandonment. The settlement had been purpose-built to house workers for the mine, consisting of 43 modest company houses, a company store, a small schoolhouse, and a medical office staffed by a company doctor. The mine itself had been considered promising, with geological surveys suggesting rich coal seams accessible through relatively straightforward horizontal shaft mining into the mountainside. The professor's investigations eventually led him to the home of Elijah Harmon, then 93 years old, and one of the last living residents of the original Hollow Creek settlement. Harmon had been a boy of 8 when the incident occurred. His father, who worked as a clerk in the company store rather than in the mine itself, had moved the family away immediately afterward. Now, nearing the end of his life, Harmon seemed almost relieved to finally speak of what he had witnessed. "Those men didn't die in no collapse," the elderly man had whispered to Whitaker during their first interview. "They drowned, miles from any river, inside a mountain." His hands trembled as he spoke. his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Water came up from below, they said, not down from above like you'd expect in a flood. Up, like something was pushing it. The settlement of Hollow Creek had been established in 1862, during the height of the Civil War, when coal was in high demand for both Union and Confederate forces. The Blackwood Coal Company, owned by a northern industrialist named Winston Blackwood, established operations there despite the region's divided loyalties. The geography was ideal, a narrow valley surrounded by resource-rich mountains with a small creek providing necessary water for operations and the modest needs of the workers and their families. Blackwood had acquired the land through a series of transactions that Whitaker found suspiciously undervalued. Local landowners had sold their properties for a fraction of their worth, with several sales completed in unusual haste. One seller, Jefferson Davis Monroe, had written in a letter to his sister in Virginia, "I would rather take Blackwood's meager offer than spend another night hearing what comes from beneath that land." The Shawnee avoided this valley for good reason. By all accounts, Winston Blackwood was neither better nor worse than most mine operators of his time. Former Union officer turned businessman, he maintained strict control over his operation but provided steady employment in uncertain times. Company records described him as efficient and forward-thinking, though local recollections painted him as distant and coldly calculating. He rarely visited the mine himself, preferring to manage operations through his foreman, a man named Samuel Garner. Whitaker found surprisingly little information about Blackwood's background before his arrival in Kentucky. Military records confirmed his service as a captain in the Union Army until 1863, when he was honorably discharged following an unspecified injury at Chancellorsville. His sudden acquisition of capital sufficient to establish a mining operation remained unexplained. A single photograph in the State Historical Society archives showed him as a thin-faced man with deep-set eyes and a rigid posture, standing proudly before the mine entrance in early 1863. Most notable was his expression, not the pride of a successful businessman, but something more akin to hunger. Garner's reputation, however, was considerably darker. A tall, gaunt man with penetrating eyes, he had also served in the war, though in what capacity remained unclear. Some claimed he had been involved in prison camps. Others suggested more clandestine operations. Whatever his past, he brought to Hollow Creek a methodical discipline that bordered on cruelty. Workers were pushed to extract more coal, dig deeper tunnels, work longer hours, all while safety measures remained minimal. There was something wrong with that man, Elijah Harmon had told Whitaker. Not wrong like mean or strict, wrong like something essential was missing. When he looked at you, it felt like being watched by something empty. More concrete evidence of Garner's character emerged from company disciplinary records, which showed escalating penalties for workers who reported safety concerns or questioned directives. Most troubling was his response to the initial reports of water seepage in the lower tunnels, reports documented in his own handwriting, then systematically dismissed in subsequent communications with Blackwood. The 13 miners who would eventually vanish represented a cross-section of Appalachian society in those fractured post-war years. Through census records, military enlistment documents, and church registries, Whitaker pieced together their identities and backgrounds. Among them were former soldiers from both sides of the conflict working uneasily alongside each other. There was Owen McCready, a Union veteran still suffering from injuries sustained at Gettysburg. Thomas and James Holbrook, brothers who had fought for the Confederacy. William Jones, a free black man who had made his way to the mountains seeking work. Josiah Miller, barely 20, whose family had remained neutral during the war, a dangerous position in the divided border states. Perhaps most significant among them was Michael Sullivan, who had previously worked in mines in Pennsylvania and had some formal education in geology. Sullivan had written several letters to the state mining inspector expressing concerns about the conditions at Hollow Creek. His final letter, dated just 2 weeks before the incident, contained an ominous assessment. "We have breached something that does not appear in any geological survey. The water that seeps through the coal face is not groundwater as we understand it. It is too warm, too mineral-rich. It carries with it a scent I cannot identify, but that fills the men with an instinctive dread. Mr. Garner insists we continue deeper." This letter, like Sullivan's previous communications, received no official response. It was discovered among the inspector's personal effects after his death in 1876, still unopened. Conditions in the mine deteriorated steadily throughout 1865. Whitaker found cryptic references in company correspondence to unprecedented geological features and concerning water levels. More telling were the hastily scrawled notes in Garner's personal ledger, discovered among his effects after his death in 1887. "Water where none should exist. Blackwood demands we continue regardless." An entry from August 1865 was particularly disturbing. Sullivan claims the tunnels shift when no one is watching. Says measurements taken in the morning don't match those taken the previous evening. Nonsense, of course. The man sees spirits in every shadow. Yet I myself have noted discrepancies in the survey maps, sections that seem longer than recorded. Turns that lead back to corridors already excavated, despite all evidence showing they should extend in the opposite direction. The miners had reported hearing sounds, flowing water behind the walls of coal, distant rumbling that couldn't be explained by normal mining operations. According to Elijah Harmon, whose father had heard these reports firsthand, some men claimed to hear voices in the darkness when working alone, voices speaking words they couldn't quite make out, seemingly coming from deep within unmined sections of the mountain. Company documents acknowledged these reports but dismissed them as the superstitious concerns of uneducated men. Garner's only response was to increase production quotas and extend working hours. A company doctor's report from July 1865, buried in state medical archives, noted an unusual pattern of symptoms among the miners: chronic insomnia, unexplained anxiety, and a condition the doctor termed mining psychosis, a tendency to perceive movement in still shadows and to hear rhythmic sounds in silence. Most concerning were cases of somnambulism, with family members reporting miners sleepwalking toward the mountain in the middle of the night, often mumbling about answering the call or returning to the water. On September 18, 1865, the 13 men entered the main shaft for their shift. None returned to the surface. What happened underground remains largely conjecture, pieced together from fragments of evidence and the few testimonies that survived systematic efforts to erase the incident from public record. According to Hollow Creek Company records, the day began normally. The miners entered the main shaft at 6 a.m., proceeded to the deepest active section, approximately 1,100 feet into the mountain and 300 feet below the entrance level, and commenced work on a promising new coal seam. Garner's log showed routine activity until 10:17 a.m., when he noted simply, "Unusual seismic activity. Investigation underway." The most compelling account came from Isaiah Cooper, the 14th miner assigned to that shift, who arrived late due to illness. Upon approaching the mine entrance at approximately 10:30 a.m., he reported hearing sounds no human throat could make echoing from the shaft. Before he could investigate, Garner emerged from the company office and ordered him away, claiming a ceiling collapse had made the mine temporarily unsafe. Cooper's sworn statement, given to a traveling notary 3 months later and preserved among the notary's papers, described Garner's appearance in disturbing detail. His clothes were soaked through, though there had been no rain. Black water dripped from his sleeves, leaving a trail behind him. His eyes were wide and empty. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from somewhere distant, though he stood just feet away. He said, "The water has taken them. Go home." No rescue operation was ever mounted. No bodies were ever recovered. Within days, Garner had ordered the shaft sealed with explosives, ostensibly to prevent further accidents. Within weeks, Blackwood Coal Company had abandoned Hollow Creek entirely, relocating operations to a site 40 miles north. The families of the missing miners were given minimal compensation and encouraged to leave the area. Most did, scattering across the region, taking their questions and grief with them. One family, however, proved more persistent. Catherine Sullivan, wife of Michael Sullivan, refused the company's settlement and demanded answers. According to court records, she filed a wrongful death suit against Blackwood Coal Company in November 1865. The case never went to trial. A judge dismissed it in January 1866, citing lack of evidence. 3 weeks later, Catherine Sullivan's home burned to the ground with her inside. The local coroner ruled it an accident caused by a faulty stove, though neighbors reported seeing a tall, gaunt figure walking away from the property shortly before flames appeared. What truly happened to those 13 men might have remained buried in the collapsed tunnels of Hollow Creek, if not for events that unfolded in the spring of 1866. Residents of neighboring communities began to report strange occurrences. Wells that had provided clean water for generations suddenly turned foul, with a taste of coal and something metallic. Streams ran black for days before clearing again. Most disturbing were the items that occasionally surfaced in previously reliable water sources: a mining helmet, the splintered handle of a pickaxe, a pocket watch just stopped at 10:17. The pocket watch belonged to Thomas Holbrook, identified by an inscription from his wife. When recovered from Martin's Creek, nearly 5 miles from Hollow Creek, it was sealed inside a watertight compartment of his lunch pail, which showed no signs of damage despite months underwater. Inside the pail, alongside the remnants of his meal, was a hastily scrawled note. "It comes through the water. It speaks through the water. God help us, I think it is the water." These incidents might have been dismissed as coincidence if not for their geographic pattern. When mapped by Whitaker nearly a century later, they traced a clear path through the underground limestone formations that dominate the region, formations that could potentially connect the sealed Hollow Creek mine to water systems miles away. A geological survey conducted in 1867 by the State Mining Authority, likely prompted by these incidents, though no direct reference was made, noted unusual hydrological patterns throughout the region. The survey team documented unexpected springs appearing where none had existed before, established water sources disappearing entirely, and, most significantly, an entire section of Copper Creek that now flowed backward against the natural gradient of the land. The most compelling evidence came from an unexpected source. In March of 1866, the body of Samuel Garner was pulled from Copper Creek, nearly 7 miles from Hollow Creek. His death was ruled a suicide, though the circumstances raised questions never adequately addressed. He had no known reason to be in that remote area. His pockets were filled with coal dust. Most significantly, a medical examiner's report, hastily filed and quickly buried in county records, noted that his lungs contained water mixed with the same coal dust, suggesting he had drowned rather than died by the reported gunshot wound to the temple. This inconsistency might have been investigated further had the examining physician not suddenly relocated to Oregon the following week, leaving no forwarding address. His replacement, upon reviewing the case files, immediately amended the cause of death to suicide and ordered the body buried in an unmarked grave in the county cemetery. Among Garner's personal effects was a sealed letter addressed to Winston Blackwood. The contents of this letter were never officially recorded, but according to courthouse clerk Nathan Bedford, who claimed to have read it before it was delivered, it contained only one sentence: "They followed me from beneath the mountain." More revealing was Garner's journal, which Bedford also claimed to have examined briefly before it was confiscated by a representative from Blackwood Coal Company. The final entries depicted a man in the grip of escalating terror. "I hear them in my pipes at night," one passage reportedly read. "Tapping in code, calling my name. They should have drowned, but instead they became something else. Something that can move through water like we move through air. something that remembers. Blackwood himself disappeared shortly thereafter, abandoning his coal operations and substantial property holdings. Bank records indicate he transferred his considerable fortune to accounts in Europe before vanishing from historical record entirely. The last confirmed sighting placed him boarding a ship in Baltimore, appearing, according to one witness, like a man pursued by unseen forces. A passenger manifest from the SS Carpathia, sailing from Baltimore to Liverpool on April 17, 1866, listed a Winston Black among its first-class travelers. There is no record of him disembarking in England. A steward's report, filed after the vessel docked, noted that Mr. Black's cabin was found empty mid-voyage, with no indication of how he might have left the ship. The report mentioned only that the cabin carpets were soaked through with water that smelled strongly of coal. The limestone caverns beneath the Appalachian Mountains are among the most extensive in the world. Modern geological surveys have mapped vast networks of underground rivers and chambers, some extending for dozens of miles beneath the surface. Many remain unexplored even today. What the miners of Hollow Creek might have breached during their increasingly desperate excavations can only be surmised. Dr. Whitaker's research suggests that in their haste to extract coal during wartime demand, the Blackwood operation had unknowingly tunneled into a previously unknown underwater cave system. Rather than halt operations, which would have meant financial ruin for Blackwood, Garner had ordered the miners to continue working despite the danger, perhaps believing the water source to be minor and manageable. A report commissioned by the State Geological Survey in 1868, marked confidential and filed away without public disclosure, provided a scientific assessment that aligned with Whitaker's later conclusions. The surveyors documented a massive subsurface aquifer beneath the region, one that demonstrated hydrological behaviors inconsistent with established understanding of groundwater dynamics. Most notably, water samples taken from various points across the system showed identical mineral compositions, suggesting a level of connectivity that defied conventional explanation. What happened next exists in the realm of speculation. Did the miners break through into a vast subterranean chamber, releasing a torrent that trapped them inside the mountain? Were they drowned in an instant, or did they struggle through dark tunnels seeking escape, only to find every path blocked? The geological record suggests a sudden and catastrophic flooding event occurred in the region that autumn, though its epicenter was never determined. More disturbing are the accounts collected by Whitaker from elderly residents whose parents or grandparents had lived in communities downstream from Hollow Creek. They spoke of strange things seen in the water in the months following the incident, shapes that moved against the current, shadows deeper than the surrounding darkness, and on still nights when the moon was new, sounds like distant hammering carried up from beneath the surface. Martha Jameson, age 97 when Whitaker interviewed her in 1962, recalled her grandfather's experience as a boy. He was fishing in Copper Creek when something grabbed his line. Wasn't like a fish strike. The line went straight down and kept going. Nearly pulled him in before he cut it. That night he heard tapping on his bedroom window. When he looked out, he saw a face in the rain barrel below, a face he recognized as one of the missing miners, though it was changed somehow. Stretched, the eyes too large and dark, it smiled at him, then sank back into the water. For nearly a year after the incident, residents reported dreams of drowning, of dark water filling their lungs while disembodied voices called from behind walls of coal. Children in 3 counties suddenly developed an inexplicable fear of water, refusing baths, avoiding streams they had previously played in without concern, waking screaming about the men in the pipes. These phenomena eventually faded, though certain streams in the area retained a reputation for being unwholesome or not right, well into the 20th century. A series of unusually heavy storms in the spring of 1867 caused widespread flooding throughout the region. When the waters receded, residents of Pine Ridge discovered unusual markings carved into rocks along Copper Creek, symbols that resembled mining notations but arranged in patterns that made no practical sense. A local schoolteacher with an interest in ciphers attempted to decode them, believing they might be some form of message. According to town records, she succeeded, though the content of the message was never publicly shared. She resigned her position the following day and entered a convent in Maryland, where she took a vow of silence until her death in 1912. The most tangible evidence of the Hollow Creek incident surfaced in 1919, when unusually heavy spring rains caused flooding throughout the region. A partial collapse in the hills above the former settlement exposed what appeared to be a previously unknown mine entrance. A group of local men investigated, descending approximately 50 feet before turning back. Their descriptions, recorded in a local newspaper, mentioned walls polished smooth as glass and the smell of the ocean, though we were 100 miles inland. More significant was what they heard, sounds they described as words spoken underwater, emanating from deeper within the passage. One man, Joseph Carter, claimed to have recognized his father's voice among them, though his father had died of natural causes years earlier and had never worked in the mines. Carter's account included a detail omitted from the newspaper article, but preserved in his personal journal. The voices knew our names, mine, and every man with me. They called to us by name, begging us to join them in the deep places. Before any formal exploration could be organized, representatives from a coal company, operating under a different name, but later linked to Blackwood's original operation through a complex series of corporate restructurings, arrived and sealed the opening with concrete. They cited safety concerns and denied any connection to historical mining activities in the area. Documents obtained by Whitaker through a former employee of this company revealed that the site had been under surveillance for decades. An internal memo dated one day after the collapse stated, "Containment Priority Alpha, seal all access points, water levels rising in observation wells. They are becoming more active." In 1938, a highway construction project uncovered human remains approximately 2 miles downstream from Hollow Creek. The bones of 3 individuals were found embedded in river silt beneath 15 feet of accumulated sediment. A coroner's report noted unusual characteristics, extreme erosion consistent with long-term water exposure, and a black mineralized coating that defied simple explanation. No formal identification was ever made, and the remains were reburied in an unmarked section of the Campton Municipal Cemetery. What the coroner's public report failed to mention, but what Whitaker discovered in his private notes, were additional anatomical anomalies. The bones showed evidence of adaptation to aquatic environment, with changes to the structure of the ribs and spine that would have allowed for more efficient movement through water. Most disturbing was his observation about the skulls. Eye orbit significantly enlarged and reshaped. Nasal cavity almost completely closed. Jaw structure altered to accommodate what appear to be modifications to the vocal apparatus. These are not normal human remains. The coroner, Dr. Frederick Langston, requested further analysis from specialists at a university in Cincinnati. Records indicate the bones were transported there in October 1938. 1 month later, the university suffered a localized flood when water pipes burst in the laboratory where the remains were being studied. All samples were reported destroyed. Dr. Langston committed suicide in December of that year by drowning himself in a bath. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, development in the region accelerated. The demand for coal increased with World War II and the subsequent economic boom. New mining operations were established, though notably none ventured near the original Hollow Creek site. A dam project in 1952 created a reservoir that submerged what little remained of the settlement. The original mine entrance, long since collapsed or sealed, disappeared beneath 50 feet of water. Local opposition to the reservoir was unexpectedly fierce, with residents citing concerns ranging from displacement to environmental impact. What went unrecorded in official hearings but was later shared with Whitaker by attendees were the whispered fears that damming the water would anger what lives in it, and that a larger body of water would give them more room to grow. Despite these concerns, the project proceeded. The reservoir, named Lake Hollow in a seemingly deliberate attempt to normalize the site's history, became a popular recreation area, though primarily for fishing rather than swimming. As one local guide told Whitaker, "Fish from Lake Hollow taste better than any in the state. They're fatter, too. Something in the water makes things grow differently." Dr. Whitaker's investigation into these events ended abruptly in August of 1963. His research materials, including transcripts of interviews, photographic evidence, and his extensive notes, were scheduled to be archived at the university library. They never arrived. A small fire in his office destroyed many of his papers, though the damage was curiously selective. His work on the Hollow Creek incident was completely lost, while materials related to other research projects remained largely intact. The fire marshal's report cited an electrical fault, though a maintenance worker interviewed by a graduate student years later offered a different account. "Wasn't no electrical fire. I was first on scene. The papers were soaked through before they burned, smelled like river water, and there were footprints, wet ones, coming from nowhere, leading to the filing cabinet where he kept his Hollow Creek materials, then leading back out again. By the time the fire department arrived, they'd dried up. Nobody believed me." Whitaker himself suffered what was officially recorded as a nervous breakdown. He resigned his position, withdrew from academic circles, and eventually relocated to New Mexico, where he lived in seclusion until his death in 1968. His only published comment on the Hollow Creek research appeared in a brief letter to a colleague. "Some veins of history once tapped release elements that cannot be contained again. There are depths to which inquiry should not descend." His personal physician's notes, obtained by subsequent researchers, paint a more troubling picture of his decline. Whitaker reported hearing voices emerging from faucets, drains, even the toilet. He installed filters on all water lines entering his home. He refused to bathe, using only alcohol-based cleansers to maintain hygiene. Most concerning to his doctor were the regular episodes during which Whitaker would enter a trance-like state and speak in voices not his own, often in what seemed to be technical mining terminology from the previous century. The landscape around Hollow Creek has changed dramatically since 1865. The original settlement is now submerged beneath the waters of a reservoir created in the 1950s. The surrounding hills have been altered by decades of mining, logging, and erosion. Little remains to suggest the events that transpired there, save for the curious fact that despite the reservoir's popularity for fishing, local residents steadfastly refuse to swim in its waters. Park rangers report that at least once a year, usually during periods of drought when water levels drop, unusual items wash ashore. Fragments of mining equipment, personal effects that appear to be from the 19th century, and occasionally human remains with the same distinctive mineralization noted in the 1938 discovery. These findings are consistently collected by individuals claiming to represent various government agencies, though verification of their credentials has proved challenging for subsequent investigators. In 1964, a graduate student named Carolyn Winters attempted to reconstruct Whitaker's research as part of her doctoral dissertation. She made significant progress, locating several individuals Whitaker had interviewed and recovering some documents he had copied and stored separately from his office. Her work came to an abrupt halt, however, when access to certain county records was suddenly restricted due to preservation concerns. What official university documents don't record, but what was shared by her academic advisor in a private conversation years later was the escalating pattern of unusual experiences Winters reported during her research. Tape recordings of her field interviews contained unexplained sounds in the background, what audio engineers later described as voices underwater, processed through a mechanical filter. Photographs she took of Lake Hollow consistently showed anomalous figures just beneath the surface, figures that appeared humanoid, but with elongated limbs and oversized dark eyes. Winters noted in her journal, later discovered among her abandoned possessions, that she had begun experiencing unusual dreams. "I see them moving through dark water," she wrote, "still seeking the surface after 100 years. Sometimes they find their way into the pipes, into the water supply. Sometimes I think I hear them in the walls of my apartment, tapping, trying to get out, or trying to get in." Her final entry, dated November 12, 1964, contained only one sentence: "I understand now why the records were destroyed." 3 days later, she withdrew from the university and disappeared from academic records. Attempts to locate her in subsequent years proved unsuccessful. The most recent chapter in the Hollow Creek mystery occurred in 1967, when unusual seismic activity was recorded throughout the region. Instruments detected what appeared to be rhythmic disturbances moving through the underground water systems, disturbances that one geologist described as almost deliberate in their pattern, like a form of communication. The phenomenon lasted for 3 days before ceasing as abruptly as it had begun. Analysis of the patterns, conducted by a linguist with experience in code breaking, yielded results that were classified by federal authorities almost immediately. The linguist, Dr. Eleanor Phelps, was reported to have taken a position with a government agency shortly thereafter. Before her departure from academia, however, she shared one observation with a colleague. It wasn't just a pattern. It was 13 distinct voices, speaking in unison. They were counting, 1 through 13, over and over, then backward, then in sequences I still don't understand. But they were counting something, or counting down to something. During this same period, water quality tests conducted at treatment facilities across 3 counties detected anomalous results: elevated levels of minerals typically associated with deep underground sources, and organic compounds that defied conventional analysis. Most concerning were microscopic fragments of material initially identified as coal, but later determined to contain human cellular material in an advanced state of mineralization. These findings were documented in a report submitted to regional authorities, who promptly classified it. The geologist who led the investigation, Dr. Alan Schaefer, requested reassignment shortly thereafter. In his letter of resignation from the project, he wrote only that some questions are better left unasked, and some depths better left unplumbed. What became public, however, was a series of unusual medical cases reported throughout the region during the same period. Patients presented with symptoms that local physicians had never encountered: temporary paralysis that progressed from the extremities inward, accompanied by an overwhelming sensation of drowning, despite normal respiratory function. Blood samples showed elevated levels of minerals matching those found in the water supply, though no contamination could be detected using standard testing methods. Most disturbing were changes observed in the patient's eyes, dilation of the pupils beyond normal physiological limits, and in advanced cases, a darkening of the sclera to a deep gray or black. These symptoms typically resolved within 48 hours, leaving patients with no lasting physical effects, but with disturbing accounts of what they had experienced during the episodes: visions of dark tunnels filled with water, sensations of moving through confined spaces, and voices speaking from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Regional health authorities attributed the outbreak to mass hysteria, possibly triggered by chemical exposure from industrial runoff. No official connection to the historical events at Hollow Creek was acknowledged, though internal communications, later obtained through Freedom of Information requests, revealed significant concern about potential recurrence of the 1865 incident and containment of both the vector and public awareness. What truly happened to the 13 miners of Hollow Creek remains unknown. Were they victims of industrial negligence, sacrificed to corporate greed? Did they perish quickly in a sudden catastrophe? Or did they wander the lightless tunnels for days, hearing the water rising around them? Did they find something in those depths, something that shouldn't exist miles beneath the Appalachian Mountains? The answers may lie buried in archives intentionally obscured, or in the memories of those few remaining descendants of Hollow Creek residents who still refuse to drink well water or swim in natural bodies of water. Perhaps they rest in the silt at the bottom of the reservoir, where local fishermen report their lines sometimes catch on objects that feel too regular to be natural, too irregular to be man-made. One such fisherman, Raymond Jenkins, claimed in 1966 to have pulled up something far more disturbing than an old boot or mining helmet. His description, given to a local newspaper reporter but never published, spoke of a hand not quite human anymore, fingers too long, webbed like a frog's, skin gray-black like coal dust mixed with clay. It gripped my line, not like something caught, but like something holding on. When I tried to shake it loose, I heard laughing from under the water. Then it let go, not like it fell, but like it chose to return to the deep. Or perhaps the truth flows still through the vast network of underground rivers beneath the ancient mountains, carrying with it the echoes of hammers against coal faces, of voices calling out names that no living person remembers, of 13 men who entered the earth and became part of its darkest currents. Those who fish Lake Hollow regularly speak of certain spots that remain productive year after year, places where the fish are always larger, always hungrier. These locations, when mapped, form a pattern that corresponds almost exactly to the layout of the original Hollow Creek mine, as reconstructed from fragmented company records. At the center of this pattern, in the deepest part of the reservoir, sonar equipment consistently malfunctions. Fish finders show massive shapes moving at impossible depths. Recording devices capture sounds that audio analysts have described as mechanical in rhythm but organic in texture, like machinery operated by living tissue. In 1968, shortly before his death, Dr. Thomas Whitaker sent a sealed package to the university archives with instructions that it remain unopened until 50 years after his passing. When finally examined in 2018, it contained only a mason jar filled with water. The liquid was clear but left a residue of black sediment when poured. Analysis revealed it to be ordinary water with trace minerals consistent with the limestone aquifers of eastern Kentucky. The jar bore a simple label in Whitaker's handwriting. They are still there, still moving, still seeking a way out. The archivist who first opened the package reported that the water had no unusual properties when examined in daylight. Under laboratory conditions, it appeared to be nothing more than slightly mineralized spring water. What she didn't include in her official report, but later shared with colleagues, was what happened when she took the jar home for further observation. "I kept it on my bedside table overnight," she wrote in a private email. "Around 3 a.m., I woke to a sound like fingers tapping on glass. The water in the jar was moving of its own accord, forming patterns against the glass that looked almost like faces. When I turned on the light, it stopped immediately. I convinced myself it was a dream until I checked my phone, which I'd left recording audio while I slept. The tapping was there, and beneath it, voices. 13 distinct voices counting in unison. Perhaps most unsettling is what happens when that water is left undisturbed in darkness. According to the archivist who first opened the package, after several hours in a darkened storage room, the water begins to move of its own accord, forming patterns against the glass that, when viewed from certain angles, resemble faces contorted in eternal expressions of terror. The university has since implemented strict protocols regarding the handling of the jar and its contents. It remains in a secured facility, under constant illumination. Researchers are permitted to observe it only in pairs, never alone, and for periods not exceeding 30 minutes. Despite these precautions, custodial staff report that light bulbs in the storage room burn out at an abnormal rate. Security cameras occasionally capture unexplained movements in the water, particularly between 2 and 4 a.m. Most concerning are the reports from security personnel of hearing voices emanating from the sealed room, voices that sound like they're speaking through liquid, asking to be released. The Hollow Creek mine remains sealed, its entrance hidden beneath the waters of the reservoir or collapsed under decades of geological activity. The company records have been lost to fire, flood, or deliberate destruction. The names of the 13 miners exist now only as ghostly gaps in local genealogies, branches of family trees that end abruptly in the autumn of 1865, but the water still flows beneath the mountains. And sometimes in communities built above those ancient limestone passages, residents wake in the night to the sound of tapping in their pipes, a rhythm that almost resembles code, a message from those who entered the earth and found something waiting in the darkness, something that followed them through the flooded tunnels, something that waits still in the depths where light has never reached. A hydrological survey conducted in 2016 by the U.S. Geological Survey revealed that the aquifer system beneath eastern Kentucky is far more extensive and interconnected than previously understood. Computer modeling suggests that water entering the limestone formations in the vicinity of Lake Hollow could theoretically travel through natural channels to emerge in wells and springs as far as 30 miles away. More concerning was the discovery of water flows moving against gravitational pressure, rising through fissures in bedrock rather than following the expected downward path. The lead hydrologist on the project, Dr. Melissa Chen, noted unusual difficulties with equipment during the survey. Sonar mapping devices malfunctioned when directed toward certain depths. Water samples collected from these areas exhibited unexpected properties, remaining in motion long after they should have stabilized, changing mineral content between collection and analysis, and in one documented case, continuing to produce sound recordings of mechanical tapping hours after removal from the original source. Dr. Chen's final report made no mention of these anomalies. When questioned by colleagues, she would say only that some aspects of the survey had been designated classified for reasons of public water safety. She resigned her position 6 months later and relocated to Arizona, a state notable for its arid climate and relative lack of groundwater systems. Electronic devices placed near water sources experience power surges or record corrupted audio and video files containing what technicians have described as subsonic patterns consistent with speech, but at frequencies below normal human range. Most widespread are the dreams, shared by individuals with no connection to each other and no knowledge of the historical events at Hollow Creek, of dark water rising through floorboards, carrying with it figures that are almost human but changed by generations beneath the earth. In recent years, residents of counties surrounding Lake Hollow have reported an increase in unusual phenomena associated with water sources. Household faucets occasionally run black for brief periods before clearing. Local authorities have dismissed these reports as the result of regional folklore, possibly exacerbated by environmental concerns about water quality in coal mining areas. Internal communications, however, reveal ongoing monitoring of these incidents and their correlation with specific meteorological conditions, particularly periods of heavy rainfall that might raise water levels in subterranean systems. Perhaps most telling is the continued presence of unmarked vehicles near certain access points to Lake Hollow, particularly during seasonal drawdowns when water levels are at their lowest. Observers report individuals in specialized diving equipment entering the water at night, carrying equipment consistent with advanced sonar technology and specimen collection. These operations have no connection to any publicly acknowledged research or maintenance activities. A former member of one such team, speaking on condition of anonymity, claimed their work involved monitoring and containment rather than research. "We're not trying to understand it," he stated. "We're making sure it stays where it is. The water level is important, keeps the pressure balanced. If the reservoir were to dry up, or if the underground channels were to shift." He declined to elaborate further, saying only, "Some things should stay buried. Some depths shouldn't be reached. Those miners found something down there, something that was waiting. Something that's still waiting." The most recent documented incident occurred in 2017, when a severe drought caused Lake Hollow's water level to drop more than 20 feet exposing areas of the lakebed that had been submerged since the reservoir's creation. A group of local teenagers exploring the newly exposed shoreline discovered what appeared to be the remains of a structure, stone foundations laid in a pattern inconsistent with any known building from the original Hollow Creek settlement. Photographs taken by the teens show a circular arrangement of megalithic stones, each bearing carvings that anthropologists later identified as similar to, but distinct from, known Native American petroglyphs from the region. Most notable was a repeating symbol that resembled a stylized human figure with elongated limbs and an oversized head, surrounded by wavy lines interpreted as representing water. Before proper archaeological investigation could be organized, heavy rains returned the lake to its normal levels, submerging the site once more. County officials dismissed the discovery as the remains of an early settler's root cellar, despite the inconsistency with historical building practices. The teenagers who made the discovery reported a series of unsettling experiences in the weeks following: persistent dreams of drowning, the sensation of being watched while near water, and, most disturbingly, finding their phones' photo galleries corrupted, with images of the stone structure replaced by what appeared to be close-up photographs of eyes, human in shape but entirely black, as if filled with ink or coal dust. Listen carefully tonight to the sound of water in your pipes, to the drip of a faucet in the darkness. They say water never truly disappears. It only changes form, moves through different channels, carries with it the memory of everywhere it has been. What memories might flow through your tap, carried from deep beneath mountains where 13 men vanished into the dark waters of Hollow Creek? What might be trying still to surface after all these years? Consider the persistence of water, how it shapes landscapes over centuries, dissolves stone, creates caverns where none existed before. Consider how the human body is itself mostly water, how permeable the boundary between what is us and what surrounds us. The miners who entered Hollow Creek Mine that September morning in 1865 were men of flesh and blood and bone. What emerged afterward, what still moves through the underground rivers and occasionally rises through well water and spring-fed streams, may remember being human once, may still, in some fashion, believe itself to be human, or perhaps it has become something else entirely, something that understands water as we understand air, something that can flow through the narrowest channels, seep through the smallest cracks, rise against gravity when necessary, something that remembers the terror of drowning in darkness and wishes to share that experience with others. The rain falls steadily across the Cumberland Gap tonight, washing away traces, carrying secrets deeper into the earth, or perhaps, finally, bringing them to light. Those who live near Lake Hollow follow certain unspoken rules. They don't swim in natural bodies of water. They install filters on their home water systems, not just for sediment or bacteria, but specialized filters that screen for abnormalities they can't quite define. They don't leave standing water uncovered overnight. They teach their children to listen for tapping in the pipes and what to do if they hear it. Close the faucet immediately, pour salt around the drains, turn on all the lights. Most importantly, they never speak the names of the 13 miners who disappeared that day. Names have power, the old-timers say. Names can call things from the depths, things that have been waiting for generations, adapting, changing, becoming one with the water that claimed them, things that remember being human but are becoming something else, something born in the flooded darkness where Hollow Creek Mine once descended into the heart of the mountain. The water remembers, the water waits, the water rises a little higher each year, and somewhere in its depths, 13 voices still call out names, still count in unison, still tap against the barriers that separate their world from ours. Listen for them tonight, in the quiet moments when water moves through hidden pipes. They might be calling your name next.